I don't even know how to begin. I don't even know all of the things to say thank you for. We walk in the house. It's beautiful. There's food in the refrigerator. It was just an exceptional favor that someone or many or whatever have done for us. I would like to be able to wait and say some other thank you Sunday when I realize some things I need to say thanks for. But I want to thank Gary for his work with you, and I appreciate how often when we would hear from you, you express appreciation for Gary and for what he was doing here. I think that speaks well of Gary, and I think it speaks well of you. I don't know all of the details, but I understand Gary is going to remain at least for some time, and that will be pleasant. It will be good to work together with him. Of course, I thank you for your support this past year, and I have felt an extension of you and would tell the people we would study with. I did not come from an organization. No one sent us. We chose to come. But there's a group of Christians back in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, who are supporting us while we are here. That interested many of them to know that one group stood behind all of that. There was not some large organization that had sent us. If I sound different speaking, it is because I have not been speaking English for the past year. Well, it has been English, it has not been American. We have not used contractions. We have not, here I would say we. The word don't has not been in my vocabulary, it has been do not. And we would speak very carefully like this in our Bible studies, which we would have many of every day. And some Americans came through Prague, and we tried to shift quickly into American, and we got greatly amused at ourselves. Our tongues were all tied, none of us could speak, and we wondered how we would do when we got back to the United States. I remember when Leslie Disselkamp had been overseas and he came back and he preached for the first time, his son sat in the audience and says, "It's ruined, can't preach anymore." But he recuperated. I hope I will recuperate also. I have really not planned anything to say. There is so much to say. It will take me some time. Do you know when I got back from China after 5 weeks last May? I said I will tell you quickly and get it out of my system, and then I will not bore you with it anymore. I'm not making any kind of promise like that. You are going to hear about China and Czechoslovakia, I'm sure, for a long time to come. You will hear many illustrations. You will hear about many people. You will hear about many events. I cannot begin to tell you everything tonight. I think of this statement of the Apostle Paul in Acts the 14th chapter, when he came back to Antioch, and in verse 27 it says, "And when they were come and had gathered the church together, they rehearsed all things that God had done with them, and that he had opened a door of faith unto the Gentiles, and they tarried no little time with the disciples." I really appreciate now that last expression, that if Paul rehearsed all that had occurred with him, first of all, I'm amazed that he was able to do that. But then I can appreciate it when it says, "and they tarried no little time with the disciples." I think that is not talking about the one occasion that Paul spoke to them. I think he spent some time there in Antioch after that. But what do you want to know? I've got to say some other things first. Several of you sent us pictures of the kids down in the class. And that was great to look at these people and to see that they've grown Some of them we didn't recognize at first. We had to say, "Who's that?" "Oh yes, I know who that is." And that was a great pleasure. And for the communications we've had from you, that was encouraging. At first you didn't write a lot, but Bertina maybe explained that to us. She is our daughter-in-law who is in Czechoslovakia now. And she said, "I wanted to write to you, but here you were trying to open windows and make noise so that the bugs in the walls wouldn't discover what you were doing. And what am I going to write about in the United States?" Well, we wanted to hear, "It rained today," or "So-and-so is well today," or "Someone is sick today." Not that we wanted to hear someone was sick, but we wanted to hear the news. But then you started writing, and it has meant so much to us to hear about you and to know what is going on here and to keep the contact that we have with you. When I said the kids, I must tell you this one story. There is absolutely no organization to any of this tonight. If you read the last report, you read of the English teacher in Charles University who is very outspoken. Marlene knows what I'm going to tell. Of her criticism of all the former communists who are still in the government, and they are bogging things down. They are still in these privileged positions. And so she was talking to the Minister of Interior one day, went into his office and occupied his time and made her complaints. And she said, "I'm tired of all these former communists still in these positions who are abusing their authority and power, and you're one of them. And I have a list here of complaints and charges, and I'm going to mail these to someone." It was not long after that till she was picked up by state police and driven out to a restaurant in the woods, and a phone call was made, put in the car and driven to another place where they broke her necklace and snatched it from her. They took her wedding ring, they took her coat, they took her shoes away from her, they handcuffed her, they beat her with a nightstick until she was unconscious and cracked her rib, and jailed her overnight and would not let anybody know that she was there. The next day, they would not give her back her stuff. They did give her her shoes, and they told her, "You don't have any witnesses, it's your word against ours." And then let her go, and she had to hitchhike home. This is a very intelligent lady, and a lady of great dignity, although, as I said in my report, she tried my patience sorely. Because for about the first 4 sessions, every time I would try to answer one of her questions, she would lean over in the table and say, moment, I'm sorry, but I must." And I don't care how determined I was to speak, I wasn't going to speak, she was going to speak. And that is the way it went until she got it all out of her system. And then finally, she came in one day and she said, "I have said all I want to say. You know what I need, teach me." And I took a deep breath and began to teach. She obeyed the gospel about 4 weeks ago, incidentally. You have not heard that. That was not in the last report. But she came in a couple of weeks ago, and she said, "Oh, a terrible thing happened to me on the way here. I was waiting at the bus stop, and you must tell me, am I guilty?" She said, "A little kid came up to me, and I hate kids." I thought, well, Teresa, you've got 4. But she said, and it was all in my skirts, and I was thinking, get away from me, get away. And it looked in my eyes just as if it understood and ran out into the street, and a car hit it. And I watched it die, and my heart is aching. And she says, was it my fault? She says, "I saw it in spasms. It was." And so we got to asking her, "Well, did the police come?" And she looked at it as if we were foolish. "Police? No." "Did its parents come?" She looked at us as if she's not understanding. "What do you mean, did its parents come?" We said, "The little kid's parents." She said, "Kid, cat." So we were terribly relieved that it was a cat and not a kid that was killed. And we had a lot of amusing things like that with language. But Alana, who was one of our translators, who was baptized last week, incidentally, we told about this. She is a vegetarian. She's now a Christian. But one of the reasons she was a vegetarian was she didn't want to eat her uncle or her grandfather or someone. And so I told this little story to her thinking she would be amused. And when I finished the story and how relieved I was that it was a cat, not a kid, she said, "Did it make any difference to you?" And I said, "Well, yes, Alan, it did." But she says, "Doesn't make any difference to me." So that was a story wasted on her, that it was a cat and not a kid. But when you're going from one language to another, there were some incidents like that occurred. Now let me see, where do I want to start? I think I'll start with the latest news. I don't remember how many I said in the report were baptized. I think there were 7. If you got one of the late reports, there were a couple more added. There are now 13 who have been baptized in the last 6 months in Czechoslovakia. Katka, the young lady from Brno, was baptized. Incidentally, I've learned to count like, you see that? You don't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is jeden, dva, and you can't say 3. No American can say 3. Their president cannot say 3. Styži piet, but you start like this. And where was I? I was telling you who was baptized. Katka was baptized. Teresa, the English teacher, was baptized. Martin, who, when he was first contacted and asked if he wanted to study the Bible, said no, he was really more interested in studying English. And the first words he said to me when we sat down to study was, "I do not believe in God, I'm a materialist." Well, he's now a Christian. We had used him for a good while to translate for us because he came to like us and he was someone we could depend upon, and his English was quite good. But besides studying with him, he sat in on classes with me, with Scott, and with Jeff Young, who is there, and he heard people come who were Jehovah's Witnesses, who were Seventh-day Adventists, who were atheists, who were worldly people, who were Catholics. And he sat in on all those studies, and he is probably the best informed of all of our converts. We expect him to become perhaps the first Czech preacher, but he was baptized last week. Alan, another translator, was baptized. So I will be writing a report. I'll get a copy of it made and tell you all the details of the recent baptisms. And Scott, I'm sure, will continue to send reports so that you will know what is happening in Czechoslovakia. As for China, you may remember there was a young man I wrote in one of the early reports who said he wanted to be the first Chinese gospel preacher. Well, it looks as if that is what he is. He is the one who lives so far from the other group where they met. He started a church in his own home. When he was baptized, even though he was married and had a child, because of the crowded housing, he still lived in the singles dormitory of his work unit, and his wife lived in the singles dormitory of her work unit, and kept the child. But just after he was baptized, he got his own apartment, which would be a room not a lot larger than this one over here, somewhat larger than this. And he immediately began asking friends in to meet with him. There is now a church there. He has baptized 7 people on his own. Jeff had the difficulties you probably read of in my last report. I'm not sure if I got those detailed for you or not. And he was not able to work with the Christians because they traced the Christian. I could say some time if I knew. I want to ask you. I will just go ahead and tell you. When we left China, Jeff remained after us for a week or so. And as a result, there was an old charge that was brought against him, I think probably because he tried to contact Grace. and get her out. Or he may have said something very political at English Corner. But if you remember when he was first there was a Chinese who was in charge of ushering the embassy people around and the consulate people around. And since they lived in the consulate, they were in on many consulate affairs. And he took a dislike for Jeff, and he sought to get Jeff to toast the Red Army one evening. First of all, Jeff wasn't going to toast the Red Army, and second, he wasn't going to drink the liquor. And so the man was very angry with him, and he began to make charges about Jeff being a spy, and it was shortly after that that Jeff left and came back to the United States. Well, that old charge was resurrected. They followed him, and they photographed the Christians who had talked with Jeff. And when he left, after about 10 days after we left, and he went back in a month later, he found that the older Christians there had been questioned and shown photographs of themselves talking with him on the street, and they were all frightened. And one Sunday they missed meeting until Peter, if you remember, who was baptized last May, said, "We can't do this. I don't care if we are afraid of the government. We've got to do what's right." He rounded them up, and they met, and they have continued to meet. And there has evidently been no more trouble as far as they are concerned. But when Jeff found that out, he left. But in that period of time, he had contacted Marvin, who was meeting on the north side of town. And so they traced Marvin to Jeff. And they went into his apartment, grilled him for 2 hours. They inventoried his Bibles, his concordances, and all of his religious material. But he stood up to them, and he didn't back down, and they left, and he's had no more trouble. And he had already baptized one at that time, and he's baptized 6 since that time. So the Christians have known some persecution. They have stood, and they are teaching. Peter also has baptized his wife. All of that's good news. And I can't remember how all of that story got started, but that is what is going on in China. I know what I was going to tell you. So when Jeff went back then a third time, he could not stay, but he took an 18-year-old young man from the United States with him. And because there was still a lot of heat on him, though he never was questioned himself. And incidentally, word got back to somebody in the United States who publishes a religious paper, and they called me, wanted to know about Jeff being put in jail. Well, Jeff wasn't put in jail. Jeff never was personally himself questioned. It was the Christians who were. But because Jeff's Christians, I mean the Chinese Christians, because of the danger, he had to leave this 18-year-old there alone, who was there for several days by himself and teaching English in the same place where I taught English. And within a few days, because there has been a lot of activity now in China and things have begun and people have been talking, he made the first contacts and he baptized a couple of people right off. He later baptized some more. He was joined by another young man, and then several others went in and worked after that. And I can't remember how many were baptized, but 17 over quite a brief period. So it includes Peter's wife, it includes the ones he baptized, and it includes the 7 who were baptized by Marvin. There are 2 churches now meeting in Xinjiang, China. Jeff has another report out. You evidently don't have it yet, but you will be getting it in a few days, and it will really kind of repeat some of the things that I'm telling you. As far as Czechoslovakia, there's a great, great contrast. We have freedom to work in Czechoslovakia, which we did not have in China. In China, it is always a problem. Where do you talk to these people? When they want to become a Christian, where do you baptize them? If you talk to them in a park, because everyone is very interested in you, a crowd will gather. If someone hears you speaking English with the Chinese, they want to get in on it. They want to practice their English. So there is no private way to teach somebody unless, as we did, we had our hotel rooms, and though we knew they were bugged and though we knew our telephone calls were listened to, We did the best we could to keep noise in the room, to open up the windows, to bring in traffic noise. And we taught them and we baptized them there. I know in that short period where 7 were baptized, the people in the hotel must have thought we took a lot of baths because of all the towels that were wet. But that's what we did. And what is going on in China, I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows. I know Beijing this past year passed some more laws being more strict in their objections to religion, but there seems to be a pattern developing that Beijing passes its laws and the provinces ignore them. So though the Christians went through what they did, nothing came of it. They have more courage now than they had before. And I just do not think even the Public Security Bureau knows what they ought to do about all of this. So they are letting the Christians alone, it seems. We did find that there was a house church of a different sort meeting, and there were Westerners that met with them occasionally, and they were not being bothered. So Jeff's estimation and mine are different, but that's okay. You can read Jeff's and you can read mine. I think the Christians can go ahead and be brave and they can worship. I don't think they have to be too careful as long as they don't get political. They cannot stand and preach on the street corners. They can't preach at English Corner, but they can talk. And I don't think they need to be afraid of that. The danger, the potential danger is there. Anytime the Public Security Bureau wants to do anything about it, they've got their names now, they are on file. They can walk in and get them when they want to. They know who they are. But I believe they can go ahead and work. And the experience of this 18-year-old young man who went in there and was able to baptize several in the period of time he was there indicates to me that the work in China is, I don't think can be stopped now. I think it's going to go. The Chinese people themselves are beginning to do the work. And they probably are going to find some other Christians who have been there all along since 1949 when the Communist Revolution took over. The thing about China is I have never seen any people seeking truth and a knowledge of God as avidly as they are. You will see someone and they say, "You believe in God?" And I say, "Yes." And they say, "I don't believe in God, but I think it would be nice." Or, "I don't believe in God, but I'd like to. Will you teach me?" And it doesn't take long to convince them that God is. They had been told that God doesn't exist, but they were not really given reasons to reject belief in God. It was simply that the state said God doesn't exist. And of course, the reason the state said that is they did not want any interference in the consciences of these people with what the state wanted them to do. They didn't want any competition. The state wanted to tell the people what to do. We will tell you, we will run your lives. We don't want to compete with God. And so they just told the students as they grow up, there is no God. So it is not difficult to teach the Chinese that God is. And once you've got that, this is His Word, and show reasons why you believe it is His Word, and you can begin to study. And by the time you have studied with the Chinese 3 or 4 times, probably 70% of them are ready to be baptized. Problem simply is finding occasion. You have to work so slowly and finding a place, getting in the hotel room, and the opportunities in China are just amazing. In Czechoslovakia, it's not quite that way. There we have freedom. And the one big thing you have is that the Czechs will talk to you. They are interested. Some of them will talk to you just because they want to learn English. I know we had several students like that. Martin was one of those. Some of those will be converted. Others of them will not. They will get enough English and won't come back. And we had some of that. But the Czechs are philosophically sophisticated. They can quote to you from philosophers you have never heard of. They know all the arguments against not believing the Bible. Their communist educators taught them, gave them all sorts of criticisms against the Bible. Besides that, after the communists now have been thrown out, well, they haven't really been thrown out. The system has just changed. But since the system has changed, the Czechs are suspicious of authority. They don't like authority. So you don't sit down and start with Matthew 28:18. All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. I mean, you believe that, I believe that, and you're not going to hide from that. But if you want to influence a Czech, that is not where you start with him. He doesn't want to hear authority. He has had authority. It has run out his ears. It has oppressed his life. It has ruined his culture. He doesn't want to hear authority. So you just have to start slowly, study the Bible, time after time after time. Those 13 baptisms represent, as I said in my last report, literally hundreds of hours of study. But you see, they will study. They will continue to come. I am a little upset with some of the preachers in the States who are willing to go to Czechoslovakia but won't go to China. I remember hearing from one, and he said, well, I have heard of all that you can accomplish in a month's time in Europe, and it seems you have to gain the people's confidence in China. Well, that is true. But with what is going on in China now, after there's been so much activity, and there has been some regular work that has been constantly going on, this 18-year-old young man is an example of what can be done in China now. And the reports that have come out of Eastern Europe were, we stood on a corner and we gave out 200 Bibles. Yes, you can give out Bibles and do a land office business. People came by and they talked to us. Yes, they will come by and they will talk to you. But all of these glowing reports didn't add up to any conversions. And there weren't any conversions. There were some Nigerians, and I don't want to discredit that. And those Nigerians taught some other Nigerians. But as far as the Eastern European converts, the first one was baptized after Scott got there after over a year of all of the wondrous talk about all of the great work that was being done in Eastern Europe and how easy it was to convert people, and nobody had ever been converted. So the preachers are all willing to go to Czechoslovakia, and I am glad for that. And there are several following us, and it is going on into the next year. But no one wants to go to China. I can understand that to some extent. But if someone has just a month's time, I don't know why I'm telling you this, except you may want to know. Maybe some of you have a month's time. You can go to China and you can teach people the gospel of Christ and most likely baptize somebody. If you will go to some place where somebody has been at English Corner recently and the stage is somewhat set. This young man who went had preached maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times in his life. He had taught a few Bible classes. And that was it. He was obviously intelligent, and he has a knowledge of the Bible, but he did wonders in, I think, about 10 weeks, 10, maybe 12 weeks, not 12 weeks, 10 weeks in China. I remember when we went, some of you said, I wish I could go with you. I wish you could. And if you've got a month sometime, then go. And I think you can do something. There's something along that line in the back of my mind that I want to talk about. And I want to say yes. Many times over this past year, Marlene and I could say, I wish the brethren at Fairlawn could see through our eyes and see what is here and see these people and know these Christians. I felt so privileged and I felt so grateful to you for being willing to send us and standing behind us. And yet I also felt rather guilty because it was a very enjoyable year. And we were getting to see all those places, see all of these people, teach these people, watch them grow. And we felt the brethren at Fairlawn have a part in this, but they don't see it. I really wish you could see what is there. I will do my best to paint the pictures and tell you. Someone asked Marlene a while ago, are you glad to be back? Of course we're glad to be back, but she stumbled, she hesitated. Because when we left this morning, Martin, the checks are very generous. They have very little discretionary income. They make, let me see, about 3,000 crowns a month, which is $100 a month, is what they make. And their rent is about $40. They have $60 a month that they have to eat on, buy their clothes on. And yet they, so often when they would come to studies, they would bring flowers to us. They kept us constantly in flowers. They would bring other gifts. It was embarrassing when we left, the things they would bring to us. There's a picture I treasure greatly. A young man I didn't know was an artist drew me in the midst of some of the sights of Prague, and I want to show that to you. I mean, I could recognize who it was. It just needed a little bit more hair. It would have been a great picture. Martin brought Marlene 3 handkerchiefs and me 3 handkerchiefs, and he says, I knew you would be sad to leave Prague. And of course that's all it took. Marlene had already said, I know this is going to be hard and I don't have a handkerchief with me. I said, well, I have one you can borrow. And here comes Martin with the handkerchiefs. And I don't know whether it was mine or the new ones that got used, but Marlene needed them. It was difficult to leave them. Many of them were there at the airport to say goodbye to us this morning. And they even waited for us to go to the check-in and get our luggage all surveyed. And our luggage kept dinging, and they kept opening it and trying to discover all the things. I don't know what they were looking for, but they were very careful. But I was glad. I hope they were as careful with everybody as they were with us. And finally we got out. And then walking to the airplane, we looked up, standing on the roof of the observation deck. There they were, lined up along the rail, waving to us. A few months ago, some of them were Catholics. Some of them were atheists. And from theirs, they weren't Christians. They didn't believe in Jesus Christ necessarily. If they were Catholics because they'd been christened as babies. And they knew very little about religion. And there they are, Christians. And they love the Lord. And they're serving Him. And it was difficult to leave. So if you ask Marlene, are you glad to be back? And she hesitates, you will understand why the hesitation. It was so good to see those of you we saw at the house earlier. It was so good to see those of you we saw in the parking lot. It was so good to come here and see those of you that we saw in here. It was wonderful to sing with you again. In China especially, we missed the singing, though we sang. In Czechoslovakia, the singing is getting pretty good. We have had some songs translated into Czech by some of the young Czechs. I'm not sure how grammatical they are. They don't always say exactly the same things our songs say because the Czech words won't fit the music. So they would change the thought a little bit and yet keep the sentiment of the song, but give us words that would go with the music. And perhaps on Friday nights, those who attend the class, maybe we'll learn a Czech song or two. We can sing Abide With Me in Czech. Seek Ye First, we can sing in Czech. Part of It Is Well With My Soul, we can sing in Czech. And several other songs we have learned to sing in Czech. And it really sounds good. And the Czechs appreciated that so much. It is a small country. And it's divided into, it's about the size of the state of Alabama. But the Slovaks have a different language than the Czechs do. There are a lot of similarities, but it is a different language. And so they are not accustomed to hearing anyone speak their language. We hear so many accents, we don't pay any attention to it. We hear an accent, we know it's an accent. If they don't get the word just right, that's okay. We understand what the word is. But because it is a small country and they don't hear other people speak their language, you've got to say the word exactly right. And the vowels have to be exactly the right length. And the intonation has to be perfect, or they have no idea what you're trying to say in Czech. But when we learn to sing these songs in Czech, and it's easier to sing the songs than it is to speak, that meant so much to them, and they would simply sit there and glow to hear the songs that we had been singing, some of them translated in Czech, and instead of singing them in English with us, we are singing in Czech with them, and hear the praises of God sung in their own tongue. Well, there are 2 churches in Shenyang, China. I don't know exactly how many Christians there are. I'll have to sit down and add that up. But there are 2 good groups now. They're small, but they are workable groups and large enough to do something. And there's a congregation of 13 people, 12 people in Prague. Now that's going to diminish, though I'm sure it will be added to, because Mira, I forgot to tell you about Mira. One of the soldiers was baptized. Miloš, one of the other soldiers, told me the last class, I just said, Miloš, it sounds to me like you're getting close to obeying the gospel. I think you must be about ready to be baptized. He says, yes, I think I am about ready. But he was leaving to go out of town and see his wife, and probably he'll be baptized in the next week or so. But they will get out of the army in December. And Miro will be going back to Český Budějovice, his hometown. He is already talking to his brother, and his brother wants to be baptized. And the ones who are there have promised to go down and work with him, and there'll be a church there before long. We got a call from Katka yesterday morning, who was from Brno, but who's moved further east into Slovakia. She thought we were gone already, but she'd gotten a letter from us. And so she said she wanted to be sure that someone would contact her and come over there and help her. Probably a church will be started there. I think that other areas will be easier to make converts in than Prague will be. The problem is there's more English in Prague than there is in other places. But Prague is a cultural and philosophical and art center of Czechoslovakia. And all of that has not provided fertile ground for making Christians. Except that after 40 years of communism and not being able to hear about the Bible, people are willing to talk about it, and they will talk about it long enough that some of them come to believe it and obey the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I don't know where that last thought got started, except to say, yes, there will be a group of 12 Christians in Prague for the time being. There will be others. And some of the people who have been baptized there will lead to the existence of churches elsewhere in Prague. And this little group of Christians here had a part in establishing all of that. If it hadn't been for you, your willingness for us to go, sending us with your good wishes, supporting us while we're there. Yes, some of the work in Czechoslovakia would have been done. Some of the work in China, though Jeff was being tied down in Hong Kong so much, and he had so many other things he was having to do, a lot of that would not be done. And I'm not saying this to say we did it, Marlene and I. I'm saying this to say, if it hadn't been for you, we wouldn't be there, and a lot of that wouldn't be done. And there are a lot of people who wouldn't know about Jesus Christ now if it weren't for you. There are a lot of people who wouldn't be Christians now if it weren't for you. And when you continue to get reports, and you hear what Marvin is doing, Marvin is a Christian because of the church in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. And he's going to do a great deal of good. Who will be our first preacher in Czechoslovakia? I think Martin probably will be. The fellow said, I'm more interested in English than the Bible, and I'm an atheist and a materialist. One word about Martin, who brought us Milosh, who brought us Mira, who brought us Alish. I don't know how close Alish is, but he's showing it. He wanted just to study English, or hear English. But he has begun to pick up some things. It wouldn't surprise me if he obeys the gospel. Milosh, I expect, to obey the gospel, and Mira. These are soldiers. If my country was in trouble and somebody needed to be killed, I'd hate to depend on these three guys to do it. They're the gentlest, sweetest people you ever saw in your life. They don't like to be called soldiers. In the first place, every young Czech has to serve. If you graduate from high school, you have to serve a year and a half. If you go ahead to go to university and you graduate, you only have to serve a year or something like that. And so they are serving their obligatory time, and they're looking forward to getting out. And I had listed in my date book under appointments, whenever they would come, I would just list the Army is the way I would list their appointment. But when Martin told me they do not like to be referred to like that, I started listing them by their names. And I wish so much you could meet them and you could know them. Maybe after I've had time to think a bit, I can come up with some descriptions that will help you to know them better and understand them. I know there were some other things I wanted to say thank you for. I hope you'll overlook a lot of things I haven't said. It's 2:30 in the morning, according to the time we got up this morning. But that's all right. About the last 3 nights we've been up till 2 o'clock anyhow, so I think maybe we were getting on schedule to come home. But I will think of those things, and I will have more to say and gratitude to express come Sunday morning. But I hope that one thing that can come across is I really do appreciate you. And I want you to understand what you have done in sending us overseas this past year. Do you have a song you want to sing, good? There's probably somebody here who's not a Christian. Why in the world aren't you a Christian? When I think of the people we've talked to, and I think of the Chinese who are seeking so, and what it costs them to be a Christian. And I think of the Czechs who finally understand and things fall in place and they obey the gospel. And some of the problems it is for them to be Christians and the commute that some of them have to make. Teresa has to get on a bus and go to the end of the tram line and catch the Metro Underground from there and then transfer to another tram to get to services. It takes her over an hour. I know some of you have some long commutes too. Other ones have long commutes like that just to come in to worship. But I see people in nations like that that have had so little, who still have so little. And how precious when they come to believe Jesus Christ is to them. There are a lot of observations I'm going to be sharing with you. I thought about you. I thought about our work here. And I'll be telling you some of those thoughts as time goes on. But I think of people I love here, some young people here that I care a lot about, and I think, I wish you could see. I wish you could be there. I wish you could have been there and sat in on the studies and watched these other people, some of them young people, hear about the gospel and obey it, and see how truly important it is. So maybe there is someone here tonight who has not given his or her heart to Christ, and who would tonight come to Jesus and be baptized. Take your place in the kingdom with the brothers and sisters here, but also brothers and sisters around the world, and those new Czech Christians and those Chinese Christians. If you would obey the gospel, why don't you come all together, we stand and sing. What's your number, Drew? Number 21.